The 20 Greatest Economists.
Karl Menger. The important economists rejected the cost of production theories of value that had been developed by Adam Smith and David Ricardo. He developed instead the marginal utility theory, calling it the subjective theory of value, where both sides gain from exchange. Utility is the benefit obtained using a product. Menger emphasized that the marginal utility of goods rather than labor inputs is the source of their value. The labor theory of value could not explain fluctuating values for different kinds of labor, nor did it explain how goods could be more valuable than others. The subjective theory of value provides the idea that the value of a good is not determined by an inherent property of the good, and it is not dependent on the labor necessary to purchase the good, but the value is determined by the importance an individual places on the good itself. The theory solved the diamond-water paradox, stating the contradiction that even though water is overall more useful than diamond in terms of survival, diamonds command a higher price in the market. Menger rejected the use of mathematical methods that insist that the function of economics is to investigate the essences rather than the specific quantities of economic phenomena. He emphasized that all economic activity implies risk. That risk is the uncertainty in economic decisions, stressing the role that entrepreneurs have collecting and evaluating information in terms of a market and act on those risks. For those reasons and others, the economists deviated from classical and neoclassical economics. Eugene von Bonberg. He made great contributions to the Austrian school of economics. He presents alternative treatments of interests, productivity theories, and abstinence theories. Bewerk criticized Marx by saying that capitalists helped their employees by providing with an income well in advance of the revenue from the goods they produce. He argues that the Marxist theory of exploitation ignores the dimension of time in production, which is discussed in his theory of roundaboutness. Roundaboutness is a process where capital goods are produced first, and then with the help of capital goods, the desired consumer goods are produced. He argued in favor of nationalizations of industries in Vienna, contradicting the views of another prominent member of the Austrian school of economics, Ludwig von Mises. Vilfredo Pareto introduced the concept of Pareto efficiency. He was the first to discover that income follows a power law probability distribution. He became an advocate of free trade. The writings of Vilfredo Pareto reflect the ideas of the economist Leon Walras. This economist specifies that 80% of consequences come from 20% of the causes, asserting an unequal relationship between inputs and outputs. The principle was derived from the imbalance of land ownership in Italy. It shows that the minority owns the majority. It is a simple decision-making technique that helps assessing different problems or tasks in economic problems. The principle could be used to measure how our efforts could increase productivity. According to the Pareto principle, meaning 100% with one day being 20%. So according to him, in just one day of the week, we can create 80% of the output for the whole week. The principle was published in 1897. The principle can show how much of our time is wasted in unproductive activities that achieve no results. Pareto optimality is a situation where no further improvements are obtained to an individual by the reallocation of resources, making one person better off without making someone else worse off. Ludwig von Mises describes the failure of capitalism deriving not from economic planning, but from the destruction of economic planning existing under capitalism and the price system. Ludwig von Mises' main contributions are in the field of classical liberalism, which advocates civil liberties under the rule of law to obtain economic freedom. In the 1970s, however, the implementation of classical liberalism in economics started having some problems with Keynesian economic management because trade unions caused major industrial disruptions. Union workers in the United States were losing a lot of their previous productivity at work, and economists like Milton Friedman advocated for the reversal of social liberalism. Von Mises argues that the pricing systems in so-called socialist economies are deficient because if a public entity owns the means of production, no rational price could be obtained from the capital goods as they were merely internal transfers of goods and not objects of exchange. In his magnus opus, Human Action, he uses praxeology as a method to understand the structure of human decision-making. Ludwig von Mises is best known for his development of the Austrian business cycle theory. He also provided strong economic arguments against socialism, stating the system with its economic planning destroys the price system. This price system is expressed in terms of money for the valuation and distribution of goods and services and the factors of production. Joseph Schumpeter. He popularized the term creative destruction, stating that the Gale process of industrial mutation that continuously revolutionizes the economic structure from within is incessantly destroying the old one and creating a new one. He emphasizes innovations in the manufacturing process that increase productivity. Some examples of creative destruction include tablets and Kindles replacing conventional printed books, traditional watches increasingly becoming replaced by smartwatches, camera companies whose business was greatly replaced by smartphone companies. Schumpeter's theory emphasizes that the success of capitalism will lead to a form of corporativism and fostering values hostile to capitalism. Entrepreneurship will thrive in advanced capitalism and eventually be replaced by some form of socialism. In terms of capitalism, he was right, since at least from the 1970s to the year 2010, corporations steadily have risen to extreme power, especially in the United States. Corporativism advocates the organization of society by corporate groups, in military, business, scientific, or guild association based on their common interest. This tremendous rise is threatening the essentials of democracy. Social media companies and other Silicon Valley corporations have grown so much, making it almost impossible for other free competition, which violates the classical economic concept of the other great economists. Friedrich Hayek, together with John Maynard Keynes, are considered the two greatest economists of the beginning of the 20th century. Hayek's fundamental contributions were in the field of political theory and economics. He considered a connection between business cycles, capital theory, and monetary theory. Business cycles is the combination of expansions and depressions in the economic activity, while capital theory implies that productive capacity can increase by greater education and skills, and monetary theory presents a change in money supply as the main driver of the economic activity. He pioneered work in the theory of money and economic fluctuations. Like Adam Smith, he acknowledges that the market was of spontaneous nature, meaning that the unplanned economy resulting from human actions increased the money supply, or the sum of currency and checking accounts. He researched on the interrelations between economic, social, and political processes. His book, Road to Serfdom, is a classic that must be read. John Maynard Keynes. Refined work on the causes of business cycles, which are intervals of expansion followed by periods of recession, using mathematical principles. Macroeconomic theories and models of how aggregate demand or the total spending in the economy have a strong effect on the economic output, or quantity of goods or services produced in a particular period. Those effects can be reflected on inflation. He is considered one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, establishing a school of thought known as Keynesian economics. He challenged the ideas of neoclassical economics that believed that the free market would automatically create full employment. His main contributions came after the Depression of 1929 when he advocated using fiscal and monetary policies to mitigate the adverse effects of economic recessions and depressions. His ideas started to be criticized in the 1970s by Milton Friedman and other monetarists, disputing the ability of governments to regulate the business cycles. During the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, many famous economists created a resurgence of Keynesian thought called Neo-Keynesian. Among those, we include Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz. The Chicago School of Economics was founded in the 1930s, advocating for the development of models with false assumptions. The Chicago School is Neo-Keynesian or quasi-Keynesian. The school of thought originated at the University of Chicago. The school believes in free markets with minimal government intervention in the economy. The Chicago School relies heavily on efficient market theory that presumes markets are never wrong and that actors have perfect knowledge. The school is primarily based on monetarism, a new Keynesian view suggesting that just enough money should be printed to keep prices from falling, but not more. The school used intense mathematical modeling. The concept of rational expectations, or Friedman's quantity theory of money, holding that general price levels in the economy are determined by the amount of money in circulation. The school also believes in the reduction of government regulations on business. Laissez-faire economics are emphasized by the adherents of the school rejecting Keynesian concepts of government intervention, which worked during Great Recessions or Great Economic Depressions, but failed in the 1970s. Finally, the Chicago School is known for its contributions to finance theory, or the value of an equity share determined by its fundamental value. Some critics believe that the school theory works only when markets behave efficiently. Milton Friedman advocated a theory that calls for minimal government intervention. He presented a theoretical interpretation of liberalism best achieved through free market economics. He is best known for his theory on monetarism, which states that changes in the money supply directly affect economic growth. That theory explains the role of money supply in economic and inflation fluctuations. He researched on the theory of stabilization policy. This is a strategy enacted by a government or its central bank aimed at maintaining healthy levels of economic growth and minimal price changes. His thoughts challenged John Maynard Keynes. Milton Friedman used the term the miracle of Chile as the reorientation of the Chilean economy by some of his economic students called the Chicago Boys that implemented economic reforms in Chile in the 1980s. The Chicago Boys in the 1980s created a great economy for Chile, making it the most advanced economy in Latin America. They used economic liberalization, which is the lessening of government regulations, together with privatizations of state-owned companies and stabilization of inflation. Paul Krugman worked on international economics, including trade theory and international finance. He opposes decreasing taxes on the rich, which will produce large deficits. He favors increasing public spending. By that we mean government spending, including government consumption, investment, and transfer payments. In 2007, he detailed how inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor, declined greatly during the middle of the 20th century, and the gap widened during the last 2 decades. He supports free trade and supported an anti-globalization movement. He has promoted the ISLM model of the neoclassical synthesis in the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. He has been gravitating towards the views of 3 economists, John Maynard Keynes, Irving Fisher, and Minsky. Economies of scale, a proportionate saving in costs gained by an increased level of production. Liquidity trap. It happens when monetary policy becomes ineffective due to exceptionally low interest rates combined with consumers who prefer to save rather than invest in higher-yielding bonds or other investments. Joseph Stiglitz He has a critical view of the management of globalization and of laissez-faire economics, whom he called free market fundamentalists. He also criticizes the IMF, International Monetary Fund, believing in the U.S. the economic and political systems are rigged against the middle class and in favor of the wealthy. He also sees the management of globalization, which is global governance without global government and international institutions like the IMF, World Trade Organization, and the World Bank that lack the necessary checks and balances. Stiglitz describes the World Bank, supported by the Washington Consensus that promotes stabilization and privatization of the economy, as damaging because on its emphasis of globalization. He supports Georgist public finance theory, or the economic idea that the natural resources ought to belong to every individual in a society. There should be a fair distribution of rents created by pollution, monopolies, and the control over the common. His theory of marginal productivity relates to the idea that payments of factors of production equilibrate to their marginal productivity. The marginal revenue productivity theory of wages is a model of wage level in which they set to match the marginal product of labor, which is the increment to revenues caused by the increment to output produced by the last laborer employed, or the change of output that results from employing an added unit of labor.